Hello, Internet, and welcome to episode number 333 of the Comic Watchers Show. He's Chad, I'm Matt, and this is our show where we talk about comics. Chad, how are you doing tonight?
It is Monday, but doing okay.
We're here
Yeah,
on an off night.
yeah. What was that?
Hey, I said we're here on an off night, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's the way I plan them. Off nights.
Well, it's hot as hell out here in Oklahoma City. We're breaking all kinds of records, so I'm staying indoors as much as possible because screw that noise. Once it's north
Enjoying
of
the
100, it's
American
like it's all the same.
air conditioning.
Yes, air conditioning is a must. So our guest tonight, coming to us with the new Source Point book, The Mafia versus the Klan, which I cannot wait to talk about based solely on the title, is creator C.E. Massari. How you doing, sir?
I am doing good. I am always very happy to talk, get interviewed, and to run my mouth. It excites me. I enjoy it. Anytime I can talk about anything comics related, entertainment, or really just talk. I know how to just ramble on. So this is perfect.
Well,
All
in
right.
that case, before we hop in, we usually have been trying to talk about some news stories, but not really much is happening. Although I still am having some issues with the supposed Star Wars and Marvel crossover. But I guess if you could have the Mafia versus Klansmen, you can have Marvel and Star Wars together.
Yes.
But no, so I don't know. Like I said, there's not a lot of news out there that I guess is really
Well,
groundbreaking.
I'd say the biggest news was from D23 with the cast of the new MCU Marvel X-Men movie. Some people love it, some people hate it. I'm excited because I don't know I'm old and I don't know who any of these people are, which is a good thing, right?
I know Adam Driver.
I know Adam Driver. He's Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than Adam Driver, I'm very unfamiliar with the cast, and I think that's a good thing because, if you've got a name actor or actress attached to your role, then they're going to bring a certain amount of baggage with them, and a certain level of expectation, and it it can get messy. It can work, but it can also get messy. Like nobody knew who the hell Hugh Jackman was when he was first cast as Wolverine, right? He was some weird Australian dude, but who sang, and and it worked out perfectly. Now there was no baggage to him, and he perfectly came to inhabit that character. And I hope that's what happens with this crop of fresh young faces and the X-Men.
Historically, that's where it's done the
So
best is when there's unknowns or relatively unknowns. I think probably the most popular is obviously Adam Driver as the villain.
yeah,
Sadie, I don't remember her last name from Stranger Things. Was a
Sadie
pretty big
Sink.
show. So yeah, and then the girl who was in Obsession. Everyone else, I have no idea, and I haven't seen Obsession. I only know that she was,
Yeah, I know she's
in
in
it.
it.
So
I know it's supposed to
that's
be
it.
really good.
Yep, that's about it.
So, but yeah, that's really our big news coming out of the weekend. So,
Well, I guess
Marvel's got
the
3
Doom
movies
trailer was
slated
pretty
for
cool.
2028. They've got X-Men opening weekend of May. They've got Ghost Rider at the end of July, and then Christmas time they've got Black Panther 3. So it's going to be an exciting year for the Marvel Universe, or Marvel Cinematic Universe, I should say.
I mean, I hope so. At least this is where I guess now I'm gonna be the old person too. I haven't been super excited for a while. I mean, I think probably since like Endgame, there's been like interesting things here and there.
Mhm.
Like Deadpool and Wolverine was fun and it was enjoyable. Homecoming had its moments, and I think like looking back and rewatching it, I don't find it as enjoyable other than like seeing Toby and Andrew Garfield. Like that just was a cool
Sure.
concept.
It's like
So
nerd catnip.
Yeah, that was like I said. That was just like those fun things, like almost like a fan fiction kind of thing, like enjoyable. But I haven't been excited for like anything MCU in a long time. So I'm hoping with a little bit of a revamp, see how Doom goes, see where some of these new properties come in, that they get away from, you know, I understand what they were trying to do with some of the properties. Like, let's take some of our, we'll call them like D and F list superheroes and maybe make them cool because we have stuff to play with. But really, it's like go back to what people actually want to see. They want to see the X-Men. Ghost Rider might not be the most popular, but like I think people sometimes look fondly on the Nick Cage films.
Yeah,
At least enough where Ghost Rider's interesting enough and big enough that he could be, somebody that people care about. Black Panther, I'm glad that they're revisiting actually having a Black Panther. I understand, not wanting to recast, but I also think they kind of should have. I think only getting like the Black Panther character for such a short period of time before he left. I don't know. I'm not a creative. I'm not in charge. I'm not making that kind of money. But I feel like bringing him back instead of doing, I can't even remember her name, his sister, whoever's in the film.
sure.
It's uninteresting to me. And again, maybe I'm just an old person. But I think going back to things that interest people and are entertaining is actually how you make money, not trying to, um, invest in characters that ultimately, even as far as like title properties, don't sell well.
Hmm.
Even like their like the characters that they were picking just weren't ones that even sell in the comics. Like they have niche audiences, but a niche audience is not going to make you, mainstream money. And
Well,
even
an
mainstream
exhibit
characters,
A
I
for
think.
that is Shang-Chi, in my opinion.
Shang-Chi, I
It's
was
an
actually really disappointed
enjoyable
for.
movie, but at the same time, like like you said, he's got a niche audience, and therefore, you should have
And
gone lower budget. Don't try to make it a
yeah,
tentpole movie. Make it a
yeah,
freaking
yeah.
chop socky, old school '70s kung fu movie. That
Well,
shouldn't
that's
have
what I
been
was
rocket
hoping for.
science.
That's what I would have liked for them to do, like an old school Shaw Brothers film, like do something
Yes.
different. Like it doesn't need to be big and grand or whatever. They did really well with the Netflix Daredevil. Like if you remember, like
Hmm.
that first season, it was raw, it was gritty. They were doing like the one shots. Do something like that with Shang Chi. Like make it
Yeah.
kind of kind not corny is the wrong word, but maybe hokey. Like make it a hokey kung fu film, or even like if you want to go to like the Tony Jaa, like it's a little more gritty and hardcore, but like the giant monsters, like I don't know, it just doesn't fit. Ultimately, again, that's why I don't think the properties did as well because when you get executives involved, the creative decisions, they just don't do as well. I mean, also
No.
look at Supergirl. Supergirl's a big property. Superman's a big property. They financially didn't do well either. So I don't know if there's a magic answer, but I'm pretty excited to see that one come back. We're not pushing Inhumans down everyone's throats anymore, so we're actually getting
Yeah.
some mutants, which is nice. But I've been kind of, to be honest, I've been kind of tuned out. There's things here and there that I'm interested in. Doom looks pretty cool. I'm happy to see Doom finally getting some screen time. One of Marvel's best villains, so that should hopefully be fun. And the casting historically, like I said, I remember when Guardians of the Galaxy came out. Chris Pratt was only known from people who watch Parks and Rec. Dave Batista, if you didn't watch the WWE, like relatively unknown people, and it did
Hmm.
really well. So hopefully, we get the same from X Men, Ghost Rider, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for. So, all right. Well, Chad, over to you, sir.
Um, I don't have anything else unless you guys want to talk about some Mafia versus the Klan.
Oh, hey, that's what we're
Absolutely.
really here for.
So, before we do that, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about your history as a comic book reader, and then what kind of led you to want to create your own?
Absolutely. So the way that I started reading comics, or really what got me into it, was I was born in the 90s. So what I really grew up on was animated Spider-Man, animated X-Men, animated Batman, Spider-Man Unlimited, Beast Wall, everything that came out in that Fox Kids, WB Kids era. Like
Mhm.
that's what I watched. That's what I enjoyed. That's what I loved. I kind of knew comics existed, but not really. Like my grandparents owned a VHS store, and I think my first comic they got like some kind of promo for some event or something like that. They just had a stack, and I took one of the free ones, and that was like one of the first comics I had was whatever's in their store. I think they had like maybe like a box like yay big of some different books, Spider-Man, X-Men, and stuff like that that they would just sell at the shop. But what really got me into collecting like the hard, like your true blue floppies, is I had a friend in fifth grade who I'm still friends with now. He, for whatever reason, was into Plastic Man and Daredevil. Daredevil makes sense, but I still to this day have no idea why. Like as a fifth grader, he was into Plastic Man, but he was, and he had the comics, and that's what he had. And I remember him bringing them for like show and tell, and I was like, "Oh, these are awesome! I want to get these, but I want to get Spider Man because I was a Peter Parker, Spider Man diehard." So that's what I started with. I went to my local shop, picked up some Spider Man things here and there. I had no idea about the order. I was just like, "That cover looks cool. It has Ghost Rider on it. I want it." Or that cover looks cool. It has Venom on it. Todd McFarlane is like if everyone kind of has like their quintessential Spider-Man artist in their head, and there's been lots of amazing artists that have come through Spider-Man, but McFarlane is the one because of the era that I grew up in. Like when I think of Spider-Man, like just this is gonna sound probably a little weird, but like just the way that like Spider-Man's lats were like super wide and that every muscle was like defined. I was like, if someone's gonna be a superhero, specifically like Spider-Man's powers as like a gymnast, like that's what they would look like. They would have lats that you could literally like fly if you flexed, and that was just how I remembered Spider-Man. I went to my first convention. For anyone who's ever seen It's Always Sunny, my first convention was at the Holiday Inn that they talk about that you seek through and get to the stadiums. Well, that Holiday Inn before they tore it down, and it's now the Xfinity Center. I went to a show there, and now everyone who's a little newer to comics, they think conventions. It's like big entertainment. They think cosplay. They think friendly faces. No, this was an old school con. There was a bunch of angry old men, sitting in their corners, and they're like, "Unless you're paying me, don't talk to me." Like this, just I have a box. Give me money and go away. Now, no one was a douchebag or anything like that, but that was kind of like the vibe. Like it was just older guys. They're there to sell books, and it wasn't like the entertainment fest that you get from conventions nowadays. That was like one of my first conventions in like fifth or sixth grade. Just kind of I ebbed and flowed like I feel like a lot of people in comics do. You have different points in your life when you can spend, 30, $40 a week, and other times it's like I can spend that on other things. So at that time, my allowance, my paper route, those kind of things, I could spend money on comics. I'm actually still really upset to this day that I missed the first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man, considering how much it's worth now. Like I missed it by like a week or two. I'm getting like the third issue. Just missed it. It sucks. That would have been like investment gold right there. But then up and down, and then I kept going on, and then I got back into it in college. And I feel like that's really where I hit my stride as far as like understanding the material, getting more into it. I always wanted to write comics. Like that was something I wanted to do. Originally, like my professional goal was to be a professional fighter. Like that's what I wanted to do. I've been doing martial arts all my life. I wanted to fight professional MMA. It didn't end up working out for a variety of reasons, but one of the people that I idolized was Mayhem Miller. So anyone who's seen Bully Beatdown, the guy who hosted it, Mayhem Miller, he was in a couple movies. His personality, just he could market himself with crazy entrances, and he was doing like WWE style entrances with like schoolgirl outfit, dancing, doing Hannibal Lecter math, like this whole nine thing. But his personality allowed him to cross over into MTV, then later movies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, oh, I'm probably not going to be the best fighter ever, but I could totally like do some crazy entrances and like use that as a stepping stone to get to the thing that I ultimately want to do, which is creative writing, because I didn't understand how it worked. Like I didn't understand how do you get a book deal? How do you get a comic deal? Like obviously people take that route. But for whatever reason, it was just kind of fuzzy to me, and it kind of made sense. Like I like martial arts. Let me use that as my pivoting point. Well, it didn't work out. I ended up becoming a journalism major in college, and I just kind of pivoted from MMA journalism, which I kind of got me started at like officially writing, because journalism was something I could sell to my parents. Is like, hey, I'm not getting a BS degree. Like, hey, look, I can get a job doing this. Yay! Like, there's actually an avenue to go down through journalism. So I use that to like do comics journalism. I wrote for Ain't It Cool News. I wrote for Comics First for years. I did a couple things with Screen Rant, and I used that as my kind of like inside baseball route to talk to creators. Like I talked to Scott Snyder. I used to know all the people on the DC press, like their media people for New York Comic Con every single year, because working for this now defunct website called Comics First. I was their press coordinator. So every year that we would go to New York Comic Con, like I was the guy coordinating our interviews. I was the one interacting with DC's press. When, if anyone's been to New York Comic Con, they used to have this awesome corner where it was just DC stuff, and they had a wall. And that was like for anyone who was there as press, like you would get to go there, you talk to the creators. They would actually send you out a list ahead of time, and it would be like, here's our new books coming out. Like Scott Snyder, obviously he had like all the Batman stuff, or James Tynion, the fourth, like Batman stuff. 1 year, Frank Miller, it was when they came back with the Dark Knight. Like I got this really cool signed by all of them except Frank Miller because he wasn't there at the con. Like Azzarello and like all those guys on this like little New York Comic Con promo for the Dark Knight. But working with them and constantly talk to creators, I would always use it as a leverage point. Like, what did you do to break in? What should I be doing? I'd write content, whatever the content was for like the site. But people are interested, like they want to know inside baseball. So I kind of use it as, like I said, my back door of like, I'm making content for the website, whatever I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm also getting my knowledge of like, what did you do to break in? What did you do? The Marvel internships, or anthologies, or whatever. And I generally got the same answer. It's like make comics. It's kind of like the same thing that people will encounter. And like if you do jujitsu, it's like, well, how do I get out of an armbar? And you'll get some like snarky coach will be like, don't get put in the armbar. It's like, okay, well that's not really helpful. But it's kind of the same thing that you get from comics. It's like, well, just make comics. All right, but how? And I don't mean that like people were being snarky or anything like that. I understand it more now doing it. But like I said, that was kind of how I pivoted into comics. Something I always wanted to do. I always had stories in my head, creative writing of some kind. But comics being the medium that I just absolutely love. And if you know anything about comics, like it's not a medium you get into thinking you're going to make money. It's truly like a labor of love. It is expensive. Take absolutely nothing outside of like the 0.001% of people who like make it to the top of Marvel or DC. It's 100% something you get into because you love, not because you had some movie script and you thought it's going to make money in comics, because it's not.
So how did you
Yeah.
how did you link up with Source Point Press for Mafia versus the Klan?
Yeah, so I've known the Source Point guys for years. It actually started with Dirk Manning. I met Dirk at my first New York Comic Con. I was there for press. It was my first Comic Con. And I really didn't know what I was doing. I was there for Ain't It Cool News, and I really didn't want to talk to anyone that I was there for Ain't It Cool, because anyone knows Ain't It Cool News. It doesn't. They don't always have the best reputation because of the owner or former owner in certain circles. They actually got parodied on Jay and Silent Bob's Poop Shoot News by Kevin
Yeah.
Smith. If anyone's seen the movie, like Poop Shoot News, that's Ain't It Cool News. So like they had a lot of openings where I got a lot of press junkets and stuff I could do there, but I also didn't want to tell anyone I was doing it. So in like my off time, I was trying to do my learning. Like I was trying to go to panels related to breaking into comics or learning to write comics or whatever it was. And one of them, Dirk was like one of the speakers. And at the end of his little speech, he's like, "Hey, I've got this book. Come to my table. It's how to write comics. Come pick it up." Now I went to his table, 100% going to be like, I'm grabbing this book and I'm bouncing. Like I have no desire to talk to this guy. Well, Dirk caught my press badge and he's like, "Hey, who you here with press with?" And like I said, I don't want to tell anyone. I kind of sheepishly said, "Oh, I'm here with, Ain't It Cool News," as I'm trying to like sneak out and like move. And he's like, "I used to write for Ain't It Cool News." I was like, "Oh, wait, really?" That started like this whole conversation of just like checklist things where like Dirk was like, I was like, "I'm in school for journalism." He's like, "I went to school for journalism." And then I keep going down the list. I do martial arts, he did martial arts, and this whole thing. And then so it went from me wanting to leave to like building essentially like a 10 plus relationship here at this point now, over time. So I kept in touch with Dirk, and everything that Dirk kind of did, I would always, because we were friends and I really liked Dirk and I wanted to push his stuff. Whenever I was with a site or a press organization, I would always try to be like, "Hey, for Mystery or Right or Wrong or Nightmare World," whatever he was working on, I would always try to get an interview with him at New York Comic Con or whatever, to kind of, again, you're my friend. I want to pump your stuff. I want to, help get you promos, the kind of things that you do in the industry, because it's a small industry. You want to help people, that kind of thing. So he eventually got picked up by Source Point Press to do. I think that's when he got picked up by for Mystery. I can't remember his first book with Source Point. Whatever he did at Source Point, that's how I ultimately ended up meeting the Source Point group. I'd come out with my first creator-owned comic called The Six Swords. Um, we had funded our first Kickstarter. I think we were like in between before we started our second one. And I was going to conventions like almost every single weekend. And whenever I was at a convention that Dirk was at, the Source Point guys were usually there. So when I'd go to talk to Dirk, I talked to the Source Point guys, and I got to meet them. I got to meet Josh. I got to meet Stan. I got to meet Travis. I got to meet like the whole group of them. I was like, these are some really awesome people. Like, if I could publish with anyone, like, I want to publish with these guys. I actually, pitched them my book, The Six Swords. They rejected it. So I got told no. This is about 2017, 18 ish. And I kind of just kept in touch. And like I said, they got to know my face. They got to know who I am. So fast forward a little bit until now. I took some time off between creating comics and this book. A lot of reasons, mostly related to money and just, again, making independent comics. I have to invest wholly in the book, the art, all that stuff. And the Six Swords kind of wiped me out. I put a lot of stock into that making money only because the publisher we were with was attached to Terry Crews. We'd gone to like San Diego Comic Con. Terry was supposed to do this panel for his graphic novel coming out. Things didn't work out. They canceled the panel, and then it never took off. And I had paid up to like the fourth issue, so I'm out of money. I can't fund anything new. I tried to do another book. Artist ghosted me. Didn't work out. I waited some years. I got a literary agent. Um, Things didn't work out with her. I was supposed to come out with a children's book with the artist Fred Stressing, who does Rick and Morty. We had like this whole pitch package ready. Things just didn't work out with the literary agent where we were getting picked up by anyone. And ultimately, I was like, okay, I need to go back to the drawing board. It's been about 10 years. I call it my anime arc, where, the protagonist goes from a small, scrawny, whatever, and suddenly he goes away and he comes back and he's, a badass teenager or a badass man. Like, that's kind of where I feel like this is gone because I took so much time off to write scripts. I worked with my editor, Drina Joe, very extensively on a lot of stuff. I took a lot of time to really prep the craft. And so the Mafia versus the Klan, I was like, I'm going to do this right. I'm not going to lose money. I've got a family. I've got kids. I've got a mortgage. I've got all this stuff that I've got to worry about. I'm going to take my book. I'm going to do a single issue. I'm not going to go above and beyond like I did with the Six Swords. I'm going to kickstart one, make money back. All right, we're doing the second issue. Kickstarter two, make money back so that my pot or my investment, my budget money is never in the red. Well, again, Dirk took over at SourcePoint as the publisher. I'm starting to promote my book. He's starting to see some images come up. Drina Joe, who I met through Dirk, is also her editor. I started working with her. Drina Joe is the best marketer you can ever have because she's always in every publisher's ear talking about stuff that I'm doing. So I love her for that. So Dirk was already kind of aware of the book and the premise and all this kind of stuff. So he starts seeing the art come out. He reaches out to me. He's like, I remember he sent me a message. He's like, when do you think you're going to have that book done by? I was like, well, that depends on the question. When do you want it done by? And that's sort of like a more broader question. He was like, hey, look, I think Josh will really go for the book. The art looks great. I already kind of have an idea of the story. Get me like the normal pitch package. Go on our website, look at our pitch package, and go through the process. He's like, I think it's going to do really well. I think we can greenlight it and say go, but you got to put together the pitch package for me and go through the process so that, obviously all the boxes are checked. I had a conversation with my wife. Again, I had to pay for essentially 5 issues of a book up front. There was a conversation with my wife. She was okay with it, greenlit it. I told Dirk, it's like, hey, I'm all in. That was the point, and that's just put together the pitch package, got accepted, and that's how it happened. That's partially just knowing them for years. I think that's a plus. That's one thing that I don't think's talked about enough in the comic industry, at least on actually probably like not just independent, but the larger comic industry as well. It's a who you know and how they know you, and I don't mean that like a kind of like when people hear that they think of like, oh, well, I'm just giving jobs to friends. I don't. That's not really the way that I explain it. I think it's more about the fact that comics are not a big like profit margin, and if a publisher's putting their time and energy into you, they have to know they're going to make something back. They have to know they're going to break even because it's not something they're going to make this giant profit margin for. There's a lot of people who come in as like hotshot writers or artists who don't last. There's a lot of time that artists will come in and just drop projects in the middle of it. There's a lot of variables that go into comics, so when I say it's like who you know and how well they know you, it's more about is this person going to, be in this industry after 10 years of failure? are they going to know how to put a product from A to B in the amount of time that we need it? Are they actually going to be able to accomplish it? More about like a professional resume or professional work life, however you want to describe it. That I think that is what pushed me over with SourcePoint. They already knew who I was. We're going on like a decade of knowing these guys, and they're like, hey, this guy's still around. He's had a lot of failures. He's still pressing forward. He's learning from these things, et cetera, et cetera. Besides, you already said it. If the Mafia versus the Klan as a title doesn't, strike you, then I did a terrible job marketing. But that title alone also sells the book, the concept, etc. But I think what helped is like because this would be my first published book versus creator owned, having that history with them, knowing that I've gone to conventions, I've done all these things. It helps them as a publisher feel comfortable. Like we know this guy's going to finish the book. We're going to get it. We're not going to get strung out because if you're an independent publisher, like if you get strung out and a guy's 75% done of the book and they're like, we did all this marketing, all this printing, and then they're not doing it, they're out of money and they're already not a high, profit margin to begin with, if that makes sense.
Totally. So I was reading the description. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration for the overall story, because it is kind of your family history. Am I correct?
Yeah. So it is a mix of both fiction and nonfiction. It's based on my grandfather. The original idea kind of started with a Military Channel episode that my dad had saw. It's literally called, if anyone wants to watch the episode, it's great. Called Mafia versus KKK. My dad watched and I remember in passing, he was like, "Oh, this would be a great idea for a comic," and I was like, "Yeah, it definitely would be." So I took that idea and like the big thing that struck me was the way the episode kind of lays things out. It's like the Klan is, the Protestant prohibitionist entity of American history at that time. They were obviously, again, anti-immigration, anti-alcohol. They were anti-suffrage movement. They were all these different things. The Mafia, on the other hand, I don't want to paint the Mafia as progressive in like any capacity, but they were almost the anti that because they were a group of immigrants from another country. They were the ones selling the alcohol. They were also, and again, this is coming from the episode that I said, just cool as a piece of history because sometimes we don't always remember the nuances of how history kind of plays out. Think about like the Rat Pack and Frank Sinatra. It wasn't just like Frank Sinatra. It was African Americans, Jewish Americans. It was like a multicultural group of ethnic people making music. And that was different at that time because everyone was kind of like their ethnic tribal bubbles. This was kind of breaking a mold. And it wasn't just there. It was, you go to the speakeasy for anyone who's seen like Boardwalk Empire, like Atlantic City or Chicago, these big places. You had people who were African American, Italian American, Jewish American, as well as white women, all interacting around alcohol. Like that was countercultural in a certain way. And the Mafia kind of, was that pushback to what the Klan is, as again, is that prohibitionist, anti-immigrant, whatever you want to call it, force. So that was like the crux of, we'll just call it the meat of the idea. It's like, oh, that's like an awesome idea to take Klan's easy bad guy, like easy black and white. You don't have to get super deep into it. Like that's your Darth, or not Darth, I guess Darth Vader at this point in time because Anakin is suddenly a good guy. But like, what's his name? I can't remember from the Lord of the Rings.
Sauron.
Crap.
Saruman.
Yeah, Sauron. Yeah, Sauron. Like that's Sauron. Like Clan Sauron, easy bad guy. The Mafia, on the other hand, you can kind of have like that anti-hero, like grayish thing. Like they kind of helped the immigrant group in some ways, but they were also really bad. And it's a back and forth thing. So conceptually, the story, like I just saw that as like a really cool pivoting point of how to craft it. I ultimately took that idea to the comics experience intro to writing class with Andy Schmidt, who's now the editor at Boom. And I did a 5-pager for the idea. That was the base. Now, I always knew there were some stories about my grandfather. He and this is including my dad. He had a restaurant in Virginia around the 60s or 70s that was picketed by the Klan. They did not like, one, an Italian American who owned a business. Two, they didn't like the fact of what my grandfather was doing, which he was hiring African American workers. He was driving them to and from work. He was eating lunch with them. He was kind of shooting the breeze, hanging out, and just whatever. Like he was doing all the things at that point in time already. Again, Italian American, below Mason Dixon line, Virginia. Didn't like that he owned the business on top of, again, the interactions that he had with his staff, which he was just super friendly with and just hanging out with. So at some point he was picketed by the Klan. I don't know how much other stuff kind of happened. My grandfather didn't talk a whole lot about the stories, and my dad only remembers so much because he was like a younger
Yeah,
kid.
he was
He
just
was
a
like the
kid.
only memory that he has. He was like, there could have been other instances, and they just went over his head. There was one instance where he was like, he described him as kind of like this big country, just stereotype guy, overalls up to his nipples, kind of like super heavy accent, had come into the restaurant and basically, in so many words, told my grandfather to get out of town. And my grandfather responded in kind, like, you can essentially screw off. Um, if there was anything else that happened, like I said, my dad doesn't remember. My grandfather didn't talk about it. So that kind of helped. Oh, I could take this stuff that happened to my grandfather and integrate it into the story as like, hey, this is the main character, the protagonist kind of thing. But the big thing that I think turned the story from like that gave it its meat, that gave it the way that I've been pitching is John Wick meets The Godfather. In John Wick, they kill John Wick's dog, and that pushes the story forward. I needed a kind of like a similar pushing off point, and
Hmm.
I'd always known in my family history that my grandfather had a sister who he had seen murdered. But again, just the time period, the people from that generation, they didn't talk a whole lot. And my dad, my aunts knew very little about it. It was something my grandmother mentioned in passing like a few times. My grandfather's asleep at the table. He was working that day. He saw his sister die. She was shot in front of him, but they were never quite sure about the details of the shooting. Was the bullet
Wow.
meant for my grandfather? Was it meant for my great grandmother? Was the person who shot her a stalker, a jilted lover? Was he upset at my great aunt, or was he actually upset? There was all these details. It was very vague. Like I said, my grandmother mentioned it in passing. Well, a side kind of quest that I'm going on is I found out that I qualify for dual Italian citizenship. So I'm trying to gather all these documents for the Italian consul and basically to prove like, hey, here's this family history, and get the documents and information that I need, or request the documents that I need to basically prove what I need to for citizenship. Well, Ancestry.com, as much as the AI overlords are a touchy subject at the moment, it does a really good job of scrubbing places in Google that you wouldn't get otherwise, like a normal Google search.
Oh,
And
nice.
this death certificate came up that mentioned like shot 3 times and said Augustina Massari. So that kind of picked off my grandfather as a name and attached itself to him. I'm like, holy crap, that's her. That's the aunt that he talked about. I showed it to my dad. He was like, I never knew her name. My dad never mentioned her name. I didn't know her name was Augustina. So I was like, holy crap, like this is huge. Like this mystery, this thing, this family lore that's been going on forever. Like here's a nugget to it. Then over the next 3 or 4 years, I'm finding out more and more information. I found out like this is ultimately was not a small event. Like it was covered by state newspapers. It was it was a giant event in the South Philly Italian American community at the time. I found, I'm not kidding, like 30, 40 different newspaper articles on Augustina's death. And that kind of became another entity that I could combine into my story. Ultimately, she was killed by a guy I'm 99% sure was manic schizophrenic or bipolar or had some serious mental health issues. Like we're talking like
Wow.
hearing voices kind of things. If you read
Yeah.
the newspaper articles,
Wow.
like he was up and down. Like 1 second he's talking about um, how much he loved her. Another second he's talking about his self-defense. Like, granted, this is a 16-year-old girl and a 40-something-year-old man. Like
Mm.
he's saying that he's upset that she's seeing other guys, and just the guy's all over the place. Again, gathering information. I'll try to short end this story as much as I can. My great grandmother was raising my great uncle Joe, my grandfather Mario, and my great aunt Augustina. My great grandfather Eduardo had passed away when my grandfather was 3. My great grandmother Felicia spoke next to no English until the time that she died. It's the Great Depression. I'm pretty sure that what she was doing was renting out a room in the house just to make extra money because they had none. So this guy was living there for at least 7 to 8 years. Again, keep this in mind. He was there 7 to 8 years. So when he came into the house, Augustina was probably about 7 or 8. That's when he originally first met her. At some point, he tried to kind of insert himself as like the man of the house. He slapped Augustina. That was the pivoting point. My great grandmother Felicia was like, "All right, you're out. I'm kicking you out. You're gone." The guy eventually came back to their church and he confronted Augustina. She blew him off. He threatened her. He eventually comes back to their house and he tells Felicia, my great grandmother, "Hey, I left these documents in the house or this paperwork or something. Can you go grab it?" She goes to grab the paperwork. He turns and shoots Augustina 3 times in her back. My grandfather Mario is asleep at the table. Now he had been working all day. He was selling newspapers. I don't know if the time he was in school, but again, Great Depression. He's selling newspapers, food on the table, that whole thing. He wakes up. He grabs a butcher knife and he chases the guy who just killed his sister out of the house. This is a 10-year-old boy chasing a guy with a gun who just murdered his sister, trying to literally kill him. The guy escaped. He went in hiding. The entire Italian American community kind of became a vigilante mob, and they were trying to kill the guy, lynch him. Who knows?
Wow.
When the police picked him up, they were pelting the police car with rocks and trying to actually break into the car to get to the guy who killed Augustina. Again, the guy said the reason that he killed Augustina was because he was in love. Um, she wouldn't be with him. This whole thing. Augustina's 16. This guy's middle age, and again, he came into the house when she's probably about 7 or 8. You can let your thoughts kind of wander on potentially like the kind of eerie, icky, nasty stuff of how that could have started and what could have went on in that process if this guy's already as crazy as he kind of is.
Sure.
So that's the
Sure.
story, and
Wow.
that affected my grandfather until the time that he died. He had a lot of like PTSD things that came from that.
Oh, I'm sure he
So
did.
I took yeah, and I can get into that later, but that kind of became like the crux of my story. I now have these details. This needs to be the kind of John Wick moment in Mafia vs. Clan that gives it the meat, that gives it the pushing power of why the story ultimately makes sense. So I took a lot of that narrative, a lot of the details of that, and I integrated that into the clan story to kind of push it forward. And the final detail, again, fiction versus nonfiction, is my grandfather was not in the mafia. However, he knew a lot of mafioso. Um, he saw a lot of the hits growing up in South Philly that kind of occurred, and there's 2 names. Again, unfortunately, my grandfather's long passed, and I can't answer the questions now. But there's 2 names that my dad knows and that were brought up: Frankie Flowers and Chicken Man Testa. Frankie Flowers, you can Google his name, was a bookie for the mob allegedly, and was whacked by the mob allegedly. Depends on who you ask. At minimum, you could say this is a shady guy who died from shady, circumstances.
Shady dealings.
Yeah, yeah. So at minimum, we put allegedly all day, but Frankie Flowers, according to history and Wikipedia and newspapers and everything else, was a bookie for the mob, no matter what some mafia-related people after the fact want to say. So my grandfather knew him, I believe, probably pretty well and pretty intimately.
Hmm.
My grandfather, and my dad had, their family kind of traveled around a lot because he had a bunch of different jobs. At some point, he returned from Philadelphia. They lived in Virginia. They lived in New York. They lived in upstate New Jersey. They come back to Philly at some point in time. My grandfather was laid off, so he's looking for work. And Frankie had apparently offered him a job. Now, if you think about it, a guy who's dealing with shady people and is involved with shady people is not offering anyone a job, for the obvious fact that you have to be able to trust them being in that kind of, environment. My
Right.
grandfather ultimately did not take the job because my dad was trying to become a cop and he didn't want to affect his career. But at some level, he was intimately involved and knew people who lived in that world to some degree. And the other one's Chicken Mantessa, who my dad has said, like, my grandfather just mentioned as a name and knowing him kind of in passing. But that can mean like 1,000 different things. How many of us have like gone to high school people and it's like, oh, I know John Smith, but really it's just like the name in the school. I don't know if it was one
Right.
of
Right.
those.
You don't know him. You know
Yeah,
of him.
yeah, but I don't know if it's like, hey, they actually knew each other because they went to school together. Maybe they lived on
Hmm.
the same block. Maybe they knew each other because Augustina's death was such a big thing, and that's how they. I don't know. I don't know if it was a closeness, knowing names. In some way, for a fashion, he knew Chicken Man Testa. who was the mob boss or the head mobs, however you want to describe him, the guy who ran the Philly mob. He knew my grandfather at some level. What that level was, I don't know. But Chicken Man Test and Frankie Flowers are the names that, like I said, my dad can remember. So that's where the mafia element kind of comes into play. And then it's just kind of a fun puzzle piece, placing things in different places, seeing where the narrative fits, and getting to what is ultimately the mafia versus the Klan now, which is integrating my grandfather's experiences with the Klan, the mafia element that he kind of grew up around, and then, of course, my great aunt Augustina's death is like really the linchpin of this story that makes it make sense and that pushes everything along. And then, like I said, it's just being a creative person and a writer of trying to weave in everything else.
I
Oh
know
wow.
from reading the I think it's the 25-page preview that you have on your site. I mean, that, in those 25 pages, I mean, you set it up really nice. Who's who, what's happening, and where the story is probably set to go from there, because it ends with him standing in the street with a knife after running after the guy.
That was again that's like the direct inspiration of kind of Augustina's real life death. Like that knife is the kind of like the homage to what my grandfather did. Now this is where I get my mixed feelings about the whole thing. And this is going to sound, it's not the same, but it's kind of the same. I was listening to a podcast today and yesterday. For anyone who listens to Alex O'Connor, I forget what the name is. He's like a skeptic, atheist, agnostic guy who talks to a bunch of religious people and non-religious in history. Um, I just enjoy his work. And he's talking to, for anyone who knows the series The Chosen. It's basically like the creative take on the Gospels. And he's talking to the creator and he's asking him questions of like, so how do you take like this serious subject matter that, people take their Christianity very seriously? Like how do you take that story, fit all these narratives, have creative this, creative that, and do it in a way that is careful, caring, and kind of treats the story because of how much people care about it.
Hmm.
Parallel to what I'm doing, which is this is very personal in my family. I know the details of how much has affected my grandfather. I mean, he was seeing a psychiatrist in the 70s or 80s, my dad said. And if anyone wants to just think contextually, 70s or 80s was not like mental health friendly.
Mm-mm.
He's an Italian American, so you have the ethnic component that goes into that, that machismo, that masculinity to seek help. So culturally personal and culturally worldwide, he's going to see a psychiatrist because probably he's having nightmares and cannot get this PTSD out of his head. There's newspaper clippings of him at the courtroom that I have like the copies of. He's still trying to like lunge and leap at this guy who killed his sister. The police are grabbing him or pulling him away. He's spitting at the guy. He's threatening him in front of judges and police. He's having to be held back. He had nightmares when my aunt was getting divorced because he thought her husband was going to murder her. Like he was having violent night terrors. So I know how
Oh.
personal this gets to him. I also want to take kind of the same care that, and not that I'm comparing to a religious text or anything like that, but the way that he described it in the podcast of like what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to tell a story, but I'm also trying to do that story justice in a way. I'm not trying to impose my personality or my thoughts or my views. What I'm trying to do is tell a narrative, and here's the information I have, and I want to tell that narrative in a way that connects with people. Now, that connection is not me trying to, you know, tell my version of Christianity or propagandize or be like, hey, Catholic versus Protestant or anything else. What I'm trying to do is take this information and tell something that's powerful and interesting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm trying to do the same with my family's history. I'm trying to take a subject that's intimate to me, that's affected directly, you call it generational trauma, my aunt, my dad, and indirectly kind of me to a certain extent, and knowing the pain that my grandfather was in. This is a love story to my family, but it also needs to be an entertaining narrative, and I'm trying to do the justice of both. I'm trying to again place in Augustina's death. I'm trying to the one of the churches that's in those first 22 pages. That's the actual church they went to. That's the church I have her funeral card from. Like that's the church that is mentioned in the newspapers, the St. Paulstine Church in Philadelphia. I'm trying to weave in all these little pieces that are part of my family's history, but also I want people to be entertained so they actually read the story. So it's a weird back and forth of not trying to sensationalize it, not trying to turn it into like a Tarantino film.
Hmm.
I want it to feel like it's something that's ripped from a history book, because in a lot of ways it is. But you could go to a history of Philadelphia, pull out an article, and like this would feel like it's right out of it. That's how I'm trying to ground it, and that's how I'm trying to approach it, because it has such an emotional impact on my family and the people that I love or love.
And if I'm off basis, then I'm sorry, but are you looking for hopefully having some sort of catharsis yourself? Once the story gets told and it's out there, and
Uh, I think I think it's been more cathartic for my dad and my aunt, because they now understand their father a whole lot more. They understand why he did, said, and acted a lot more ways. Like growing up, like if you knew like your parent lost a sibling, and it was just like this vague, like, hey, my sister was murdered and that's it, or my sister died and that was it. It might not, you might not think about like the actual details of it that much, but when I showed them the articles and like the stuff, and they actually like knew the true details, that like he ran after a guy at 10 trying to kill his sister's murderer, or he, is trying to threaten this guy in court, and just like the actual details of the story. Even hearing her name, like for my dad, it was like, holy crap, she's a real person. Augustina, I never heard this name before. It's a real person. Um, the whole process has been something, I don't think cathartic's the right term. I'd probably say I've learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about my family, and I've grown a lot as a creator and writer. I mean, even my son, who was born last year, if I had a daughter, her middle name was going to be Augustina. If it was a son, the middle name was going to be Augustino. Just because Augustina, learning about her and going through these processes has just filled in a lot of gaps in my life, and I kind of want to pay back her, because if this is my first published book, I want to essentially bring her new life. Now, that new life might not be, you know, it's a graphic way, if you understand what I'm saying, but it's bringing her name back. It's bringing her back as a person. It's recognizing her existence as a person that was lost, and what she's now giving me in return. So I kind of want to be respectful of that, metaphysically, however you want to describe it, existentially. I don't want to sensationalize it, because her death is giving me something. Let's be honest. Again, I have mixed feelings about profiting off something that hurt my grandfather so much.
Sure.
I think looking down, he's like, he'd be very proud of me and how much time and energy and, again, love I put forward to this. Being alive, I'd probably have much different word
well, it
from
sounds
him.
like you've also
A lot of Italian curse words, but
Yeah.
it also sounds like you filled in a lot of gaps that
yeah, it's a ton. Sorry,
So,
yeah, it filled in a ton of gaps, filled in a ton of gaps with the family, but also, again, it allowed me a little, we'll call it creative wiggle room, as far as the story
mhm.
went as well, to create new things and new ways to weave the narrative. And it also just didn't make a whole lot of sense, because Augustina died when my grandfather was young, and then the Mafia element comes in later in his life, and it was that puzzle piece of like, where do things fit as a narrative, and adding all that things. And some of it I just had to change. Like my grandfather was a World War II veteran. In this, like we go into like a World War I kind of, background for the character of Mario for it to make sense. It's one of those things where sometimes you just have to create creative liberties just for the narrative to make sense. It can't be
Sure.
like black and white exact.
so you mentioned that this book is your first project after taking the break after your first one. How do you feel that you've grown as a writer and creator in that time? Um, given taking the time off, given your background in journalism and everything.
I think I've grown tons, and I'm actually glad that I took the time off. Like it's kind of cliche that you don't really become a good writer until you're in like your mid 30s, but I kind of feel like I've I'm starting to hit my stride a little bit. I've got more life experience. I've learned more. I've learned more about the craft. For anyone who has paid attention to Aubrey Sitterson and Pre-Planet, I can give so much credit to his Substack and the way that he wrote how he prepped for Pre-Planet, which was he wanted to take the comics medium as a creative element and focus and hone in on what makes comics special, which is the visual narrative. With
Right.
movies, you have like that three arc structure, like up and down. In TV, it's like, hey, I've got to do it over this episodic period of time. Prose novels. I'm a huge Tolkien nerd. I love Tolkien. His prose and what pushes The Lord of the Rings to be the way that The Lord of the Rings as a novel is his ability to craft words and create those images in your head. Comics is visual. Comics is a visual story. So learning what is going to make the medium strong, what's going to make the visual medium pop, those are things that I learned, I think, over the last 10 years that really helped. Like I said, Aubrey Sitterson's Substack on the way he described on how he wrote Pre-Planet and how he approached it was a huge inspiration for how I approached this. And just having life experience. I think one of the things that started off with the book is having my own kids, is looking at this as a father. If I lost my child, if I lost someone killed my child, I'd go to the ends of the earth, call harm to whoever did it or be protective or try to weave in that emotional weight. What I actually think pushed the story to its next level, like the way it went through a bunch of kind of different iterations where it was at different periods of time. And the way it was written with the literary agent was very different than what we approached for the final script when I touched it up. The emotion, I think it was a good emotional story. What I think ended up pushing it over the fact was actually, like, I always loved Lord of the Rings. It was one of my favorite books, but I didn't really get into like Tolkien as a storyteller or C.S. Lewis as a storyteller, or what to say, the Inklings as a whole, who were all these, famous writers and stuff, and how they approached fiction, writing, narrative, story. That's what I think pushed the story over to the next level. Because then I kind of laid in like a theological, ethical, moral, bigger philosophical picture as an underlying crust. The question of what are you willing to go through or do to get your quote unquote revenge? The easiest way I can kind of put it is the character is a Catholic. He's an Italian American. He's a Catholic. There's the elements of the Klan being Protestant and the Italian Americans being, or the Mafia being Catholic. Anyone watches Gangs in New York, it's kind of that element of ethical, tribal pushback. But what got it to that, like I call it the next level, was taking the fact that this character of Nario in the story is religiously driven to a certain extent. He never denies God. He never denounces God. He never denounces his faith or anything like that. He almost acknowledges that there is a heaven and hell, and he is willing to lose his soul, go to hell to get his quote unquote revenge on earth. That as like a thematic theme of like, hey, if you lost everything, like, would you be willing to give up your eternal soul to damnation to get an earthly, you know, revenge or earthly goal? Like, is that something that would push you? And I've got other little theological narratives kind of weaved in there. My dual degree, which I didn't mention before, was in philosophy and religious studies. That was the one, like I said. Journalism, there's real jobs. There's not many, philosophy factories to work on. If anyone's seen,
No.
it's that '70s show, the Red Foreman joke about the philosophy degree factory closed, like that. I got to flex a little bit of muscle of all the religious and philosophical stuff I did in college. So that's what I think pushed it over the edge. And I wouldn't have gotten to that point if I didn't have this break of time, these 10 years to grow as a human being, but also just to spend more time. Like, how did the really good writers or really good these persons or that person, how do they approach things? Brandon Sanderson, I haven't read any of his work yet. I know he's just got a deal for Amazon, I think, for one of his book series to get picked up. But he is an amazing, amazing resource as far as like YouTube videos, because he does college lectures and like how he approaches stories. Like, I got really into his approach of story just from listening to his YouTube videos, and now I've got to buy one of his books at some point in time.
So, the Mafia versus the Klan, is it a mini series? Is it a graphic novel? How is it packaged?
Yeah, so it was supposed to be a one-shot graphic novel. However, or actually, a little bit of a story to this. Uh, I found this artist, Martin Jimenez, who's the artist for the whole book. I was looking for an artist for a completely different project. I did the Reddit thing. I did the Facebook message thing. He sent me in his portfolio. I was like, holy crap, this is the guy. This is the guy I've been looking for the Mafia book. So I picked him up, and I'm going through the project with him, and I'm just like, Martin is so good and so perfect for this story. Like I was originally going to do like a one shot graphic novel, but I was like, I got to do another one with him. Like, and the story at least ends on like an open note where it could work. Like, hey, this is one shot, we're done. You don't need to go into anything else. But it also left the door open for a second. And I talked to Drina. I got the green light on the synopsis I have for the Mafia versus the Clan 2. Already started talking to Martin about the second one. So
Heck
there will be a
yeah.
second graphic novel to kind of wrap up the fictional Mario character story arc. It's not a happy ending. It'll make sense in the story, but it's not necessarily like like an evil ending or like a end of the world ending. Like it'll make sense when we get to that point. But we'll call it 5 issues or 5 arcs within a graphic novel, 110 pages with an extra 10 pages to take it to 120. That extra 10 pages is going to be the actual history. So I'm going to put in everything, newspaper clippings from Augustina's death. I'm going to tell the story about my grandfather. So anyone picks up the book, you'll actually get 10 pages of the real history, the real fiction, because this is based on a true story, and I want to, give those elements to readers. But yeah, 110 pages straight graphic novel. Source Point, for anyone who is interested in pitching to Source Point, they're not doing floppies anymore. It's graphic novels only. Just financially, it makes more sense for an independent publisher. They make more money off of the graphic novels. So this is a one-shot graphic novel. Like I said, 120 pages. And for the Kickstarter, we're doing a collector's one-time only print run of a cover. So if you back the Kickstarter, you get a print run cover that will never be printed, seen in stores anywhere else. I won't even have my own little connection or collection that I'll sell at conventions. Literally, if you pledge to the Kickstarter, it's the only time you're going to be able to get this cover.
And when does the Kickstarter begin? Or have you
Yep.
planned that out?
So in a month. So the Kickstarter launches September 15th. You can already start hopping on the followers page now. I've got some follower and first day backer goals for anyone who's interested. We already passed our first follower and backer goal. We're moving on to the next one. We've got 40 more before we can hit it. That means all first day backers will automatically get a free subscription to my Substack, a $30 value. We're trying to get to the second one, which will provide some actual comics, like some free PDFs and some physical from other books that I've done. For anyone interested, you can start following now. Like I said, the cover is going to be a one-time only collector's cover by King Klaus, who's done Image's Boy Trip and Mind Comics and a bunch of other stuff. I've known Klaus for years. I'm still waiting to do my book with Klaus. I've got an idea in my head. It's perfect for him. Timing just hasn't lined up yet, but he's doing original cover. He did original cover for my first Kickstarter, The Six Swords. You can see that image on the preview page as well. The Mafia versus the Clan on Kickstarter.
Hell yeah.
September 15th.
September 15th. Get out there and back it.
And we'll be
Yep.
sure
And
to
the goal
follow
was
it on our.
what's that?
I said we'll be sure to follow it on our roundup when it launches.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, and so my goal originally is I want to do it in October for Italian American History Month. However, September is apparently the sweet spot for Kickstarters. So I got the best of both worlds. 15 days in September, 15 days in October. So I can say it's an Italian American History Month. But yeah, so we're launching in a month. I'm super excited. I'm hoping for the best. This is a way for me to make some money back before it does go to print with SourcePoint, which is hopefully the way it's going to probably time out the beginning of 2027, but maybe we'll get lucky and it'll be the Q4 of 2026. But the Kickstarter is a way for me to make some money back before, again, it ultimately goes to print. And I have not less control, but like I've got other people I've got to pay, which is SourcePoint because they're pushing the book and I make less money. So Kickstarter is a way for me to recoup costs and then make more books, which is the Mafia vs. Clan 2. And I actually already have my second signed book, not Mafia vs. Clan related, to come out with SourcePoint. So that's hopefully going to be the next thing that I can tackle next year. It's for anyone who's seen the anime Soul Eater. It's Soul Eater meets kind of Mike Magnola's BPRD.
Sounds awesome. And that we can look forward to that next year.
Yeah, that's the goal. So as of now, I've signed the contract with SourcePoint. So they, as of now, not own the IP, but the IP is signed to them. I've gotten artists. We've already got some pitch pages, about 7 or 8 already done. Now it's just cranking out the rest of the script. The problem is, as I've gotten better, I kind of wanted to revisit the script now with a little bit more experience and a little bit
Sure. Put a little polish
different
on it.
perspective that I kind of want to tweak. So the artist is now waiting on me to redo the script and then get it edited and then get started. So that's my fault. But I've been really focused on this campaign, talking to awesome guys like you, to push podcasts so that everyone hears about the book. So when this Kickstarter pain is finally over, I'll be able to finally focus on the script. So that'll hopefully get released next year in combination with the Mafia vs. Clan 2 or one or the other, kind of how things time out.
Outstanding. Well, CE, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Chad, sorry, you had something you were starting to say.
I was going to say, and we'll have to. Well, we'd love to have you back before then to
Yes.
chat, but we'll definitely have you back when you're ready to chat all that other stuff. It sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would love to come talk. So I'm always happy to talk. Appreciate you guys having me on. And as I said, for anyone who's interested, if the Mafia vs. the Clan as a title, like an interesting marketing title, does not get your gears going, then it's just not the book for you. But I hope that title alone interests you as much as it interests me, because I just think it's a cool concept. It's John Wick meets The Godfather. You can kind of put those details together. It's going to be violent, it's going to be gritty, and it's going to be emotional. It's going to be impactful. And like I said, I think Martin Jimenez, he did a fantastic job on the art. I think people are really going to like it. Obviously, I'm biased, but you can, as of now, go and take a 22-page free preview. If my words don't convince you, well, you can read 22 pages of the book and see if that does it.
There it is. Well, CE Massari, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. The book, The Mafia vs. the Klan, will begin funding on September 15th on Kickstarter. Get out there and support it, because it's awesome. And we can't wait to see more of what you do, man. You said you've been grinding it out for like a decade now, and it looks like it's starting to pay off. So good on you, man.
I hope so. I hope so. With you guys' help, with people who pledge to the Kickstarter, that's the kind of stuff that helps out and helps me, keep this thing going.
Right on. It's all part of the same ecosystem. So,
And where can people find you if you're on social media? Where are you?
Yep. I am generally on Facebook and Instagram, CE Massari, and then Substack. I write stuff on Substack. The Substack name is Master of None. If you like articles about how South Park is related to Diogenes, the famous Greek philosopher, philosophy of Superman, how he is the quintessential superhero character of all time, or maybe see how J.R.R. Tolkien relates to pro wrestling and how it's basically just pro wrestling is a sub creation of the moral hierarchy and nonsense like that, as well as some recipes and other stuff that I do. That's my Substack. It's named Master of None for a reason. I'm really good at a lot of stuff, not a master of any of it. So if that, gets your gears going as well, that's what my Substack is, Master of None. CE Massari, same thing. Facebook, Instagram, CE Massari. I'm a little more active on Instagram than I am anything else. And then again, Kickstarter, the Mafia vs. the Clan.
there you have it. Chad and I will be back on Thursday at our normal time, I believe, Chad. With which creators are we talking to on Thursday?
Kat Calamia and Phil Falco.
Heck yeah. We can't wait to do it. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for supporting us. As always, you can find us at comic-watch.com, your home for fandom news and pro reviews. We are all volunteer and proudly DIY since 2017. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing. Till next time, we are the Comic Watchers, and this is our show.